couple days ago, Liz and I were staying in the hills of Umbria, and we stayed there for a week, and we're both very, very superstitious. But in the middle of the night, I'd be waking up and seeing these bright flashing lights. And when we left, I didn't want to tell Liz about it, but when we left, I told her, I said, you know, like I've been seeing these bright flashing lights at night. And when we left, we came across a shrine at the bottom of the hill. And the shrine indicated that in the 60s, there was some sort of vision. But what we found out later doing some research is the kind of villa that we were staying in, or the abbey, was a Roman shrine to the genus loci, that there was a spirit of place there. And so what I wanted to do, since Liz and I are now working on a book on genus loci, I wanted to kind of create a drawing that kind of expressed that sense of the spirit of the place, the genus loci. So this is my first little thumbnail sketch that I came up with. And then while I was kind of working out the list of what I wanted people, you know, like how I wanted us to work, different things to work on, I started to do this little thumbnail sketch. You can see that of the area, because I wanted to kind of show where we were staying and where we were witnessing these views. So the next thing I did was I created, I like to work on tracing paper. So I work on tracing paper, and I use one of these 2B 0.5 click pens, because I really like that, and also use a kneaded eraser. So I'll work back and forth with this, because you can get some really nice pencil lines. So once I get this drawing fixed up in the way I want it, then I'll go to a light table and I'll transfer it to hot press paper. So I'm going to be working on, it's kind of like a cooking show. I have these things in a series. I'm going to be working on 140-pound hot press paper, which I like because it dries really fast, but you can draw on it really, really well. The other thing too, it takes pencil really nicely, and with a 2B pencil, I can really get some nice, very, very nice line work that I'm pretty happy about. So the other thing that I'll do, I have two different watercolors I'm going to show you. When I'm doing a kind of a landscape watercolor, I like to use tape around the edges to it'll hold the lines in. And what you can do, you can save you a lot of money. Like, it's 3 times as expensive to buy drafting tape, but you can just buy ordinary ordinary tape, and I'll just put it on my shirt and dull it like that, and then I can tape it down on the page, and it won't tear the page when I pull it up. So that's what I'm going to kind of try to work on today in paint. And then the next thing I wanted to show you is how I work. I always have like 1 jar of water, and I have my watercolor kit to my left. The next thing that I do is I use blotting paper. I'll place my blotting paper underneath my water like that, and then I'll place a test strip. So what I can do is I can load my brush up with color, and then I can test it, and if it's too much water, I can blot it. So that's kind of how I work. And I'm going to use 2 different brushes, a number 2 sable hair brush and a number 4 sable hair brush. But I'm also going to cheat a little bit for the sky, because I have to paint quickly, and I'm going to use a number 6 for the sky. So to get set up, like this, the first thing I'm going to do, because what I'm trying to do is show this sort of like genus loci spirit of the landscape, I'm going to start with the lighter colors. Ordinarily, I work with the sky first, but I'm going to use these sort of like bright yellows in the background over here, where Liz and I were seeing these flashing lights. This is the room where we were staying. That was the bedroom, and this is where we were looking out. One of the things about watercolor is you've got to work from light to dark, because you really can't add bright colors. I mean, you really can't add white. You can't lighten things up after you've laid them down. So I'll go in with my very, very light yellow first, and then I'll come back in with a little darker yellow to kind of accentuate it. To add some more bright colors. Then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use my reds because I want to have this kind of, like a warm kind of glow. So I'll lay that in very, very lightly because this is where these radiating colors were taking place. And what I do is I like to work, lay down these kind of like light washes to begin with. So you can see this kind of like colors are starting to radiate out. I'll add a little more darker color. Because ordinarily I work with the sky first, but I wanted to get these colors down because when I do my sky, I'm going to have to paint around this. So I have that preliminary area down, light wash. Now I'm going to go to my sky. And the sky is, I'm going to load my brush up with a lot of water. I like to do a sky at once in one wash, and that's what I call wet into wet. So I kind of pre-mix my sky color and use a lot of water. And when you're doing your sky, people tend to make their skies a lot darker than they really are. But when I'm laying the sky down, see, I'm leaving white space. And I'll pull that all the way around the architecture. And what I'm doing in the field when I'm painting, I try to leave white space between the different gradations of color so I don't get that kind of back bleeding. And then I'll clean the brush and blot it because I want the sky to be really, really light as it comes down to the background. Now, this is something that I call working wet into wet, and this is what's wonderful about watercolor. So I'll load my brush up with some color, and I can come back in here and I can drop color in, and because it's still wet into wet, it's going to get that really, really nice kind of color. And then I kind of want it to be a little darker over here to kind of emphasize this sort of radiant kind of flows of consciousness that are kind of coming out, radiating out of the landscape. So boom, this is what I like about field sketching. My background is done. So now I'm going to use my smaller brush, my smallish brush, and I'm going to begin to work from the background to the foreground. So I'm going to wet my brush, and the mountain range in the very, very back, I want it to be really, really light purple. So this is something I call the push and pull that I do a lot. So see, I'll put the color down on the edge. I'll leave a little bit of white space so I won't get that backflow. I'll wet my brush, and then I'll pull that color down and across. So boom, I have my mountain range. And the trick is to go from dark at the top to light at the bottom. And now this wet into wet, I can come in and I can add a little color to it. And just like that, I've got the first mountain range. Now the next mountain ranges are going to be a little bluish green. So I'm going to mix some blue with my sap green to get a nice sort of like bluish color. And I'm going to wet the brush. I'm going to test it to make sure I don't have too much color in it. And I'm going to come over here and do this very same thing. Put the thing in. The other thing I wanted to mention, for me, the sun is coming from the left. So then I'm going to see how I'm doing the push and pull, and I'm putting it down. And then I can come in and add a little bit of color there. And then the other furthest mountain is a little bluer over here. So I'm going to, again, do the same thing. Because that's a little closer, wet the brush, pull it down. And you can see these mountain ranges are starting to appear. So the next thing I'm going to do is make a little greener. The next mountain range is a little closer, and I'm using more and more pigment as it gets closer. So I'll put that in. And see, I'm kind of like scrubbing the brush around, leaving a little bit of white space. Boom, I got that mountain range. And then I'll come over here, same thing. And I'll pull it all the way down, kind of adjusting how much color I have. And so I get the idea is to get that gradation. And then the mid round, I want that to be a little more bluish green. And I want at the top, I want to be dark. So I'm going to put a little more blue here, there. And I'll pull that down. And I'll clean the brush. And then I'm using pure water as it comes down to get that mid round. Then I'm blotting the brush so there's no water in the brush. And I'm just pulling that color, and see that gives that Da Vincian kind of chiaroscuro fumato that he talked about. And I also like this color, so I could come back in and add a little bit more there to darken that range up. And kind of I'm working back and forth. I'm kind of economizing the colors and kind of using that sort of inspiration, because I want this range of color, this mid round, to be just a tad darker. So I'll come back in there, and it kind of gives it that sense of atmospheric perspective. So that's done. So you can see now I'm almost into the area of the foreground. So the next thing I'm going to do is the architecture, which is kind of that golden hue of Umbrian architecture. So I'll do the same thing. I'll do the push and pull. I'll put, as much color as I can, and then clean the brush, kind of economize that, pull that color around like that. And then I'll go in here and I'm going to do the tower is special. It takes a little more effort. And this is the Abbey. It's interesting. St. Francis, the kind of saint, actually stayed here. There's another interesting story about this, that when Liz and I were after we had this experience and we're driving away, we got on the road, we turned the corner, and there was a hitchhiking Franciscan monk there. And I'll get back to that story after now I'm going to use a little orange for the roof lines here. And I'm going to see, I'm tapping it in on the edges where I'm going to come back and pull it back. So I'm going to clean that, pull it over, and you can get that graded, that's called the graded wash, but I use the push and pull. So we're driving down the street and we see this hitchhiking monk. So we look at each other. We don't usually, in America, you never pick up a hitchhiker, but we're looking at each other and we're going, well, what are we going to do? So we decide to give the monk a ride. So Liz can speak a little Italian. She's listening to the monk as we're going down the hill, and we get to the bottom of the hill and there's a gas station, and he says, "You can let me off here," but he says, "First, I'd like to give you my blessing." And so we looked at each other and said, "Sure." So I'll digress for a minute. So now I'm using my sap green, very, very light sap green, to kind of get this background color of light greens. So we said, sure. So he gave us his blessing. He got out of the car and we look at each other and we say, maybe we should offer him some money. And when we turned around to look at it, he disappeared. And I was thinking later, it's a lot like those stories where, one night you're driving down the road and you give somebody a ride, and it comes to find out that person, died on that road. That's the anniversary. And there are all these mystery stories about these kind of journeys of giving people rides. So what we found out later is this monk was on the pilgrimage of St. Francis, that this is the pilgrimage that St. Francis had taken centuries ago. So now what I'm doing is I'm using, because these are cypress trees, I'm using a lot of blue with my sap green, and I'm going to start to locate and put in the cypress trees, the same thing. And you can see these massive cypress trees up here in the ground. And see, like what I do is, like, because I'm going from the shadow area, putting the color in the shadow, cleaning the brush and pulling that out. That's how I can kind of get that volume. It's kind of insta volume. So I'm putting that in. That's my very, very first thing. So back to the oak tree. I'm with my sap green. I use sap green as my base, and then I'll come in and I'll mix a little brown, because I want this to be like an Italian ilex tree, which is their oak tree. So I'm putting that color in, putting a little green in it, cleaning the brush, and boom, I've got that tree. And then I'm going to be doing that for the rest of these oak trees. And see how I'm kind of pushing the brush around, and then I can come back in with a little bit of green and hit the shadow areas. And I've got those trees done like that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is the ground plane. And the ground plane, here is sort of a very, very, very light green. So I want a lot of water in the color to get that ground, that kind of greenish ground plane. So I'm putting down a little bit of yellow first, and I'm going to come back on top of that with a little bit of sap green to kind of get that sort of radiant color that I want. And then this ground plane is a little golden as it comes up because of that reflection from the sort of consciousness of the landscape, of that genus loci spirit that is in there. So I'm going to kind of pull that color around. Now I'm going to go to my larger brush and start to come to the colors in the foreground. I'm going to use a light green. Now see how like I push it on the corner and I'll pull it around. Now this is also, as I come closer, I want to make sure that I'm leaving white space in that color as I pull it around. And then I'm judging how much color is in the brush as I pull it around. The idea is to give everything a nice kind of light first wash. So you can see that. And then the foreground trees, I want a little contrast, so I'm going to mix a little blue with that, so I can, this next set of trees will stand out a little bit from the trees in front of it. See that? And then I'm going to pull that all the way down to there. And then the tree in the front is the Italian ilex, so I'm going to mix some brown with that, put that in there, clean that up. And now the very last thing I'm going to do is the cypress trees, which a lot more, you know, like maybe 60% blue and 40% green. So now I'm on the corners here. And if I judge it right, I put the color down and then slowly pull it up. I've got that tree. And then I already have color in this because I want it to be lighter to kind of show that it's behind that tree. And then the next thing, very, very lightly, the trees in the back here are going to be just a little more bluish than the ones in the foreground because I want them to look like they're sitting in the background. So I got that. And then the trees in the beginning, I'm going to mix a lot more blue with that. And again, use the push and pull. And I'll do a series of trees with that color and then come back with the water, clean it out, pull it down. And you can see there it is. Now I've got all my colors down. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my very, very small brush and start to add a little bit of detail. I'm going to come in with some sienna brown, which I like a lot. And I'm going to, this is where I'm drawing with the brush. I'm going to kind of show the accent of the underpinnings here. And I'll also use a little bit of that to dab in the kind of the roof tiles. And also at this point, I can begin to emphasize a little bit more of this genus loci spirit by accenting the kind of the reds that I want. So that's the first stage. That's stage one. So like a cooking show, I'm taking what I've already done. So you can see how I've worked the whole page over at once. It's all done. Now I can come back in and I can add my details. I can add my shadows and my important details. So for the genus loci, I really want to emphasize the edges here a little bit. So I'm using a lot of pigment, and see how I'm drawing with the brush? I'm pulling that down. And I think I want to put a little bit of purple in the inside to kind of like, you know, that's always sort of like one of those mystical colors. So I'll kind of emphasize some of this kind of radiant light with my purple. And then a little more red here. So I think I got that. Now the detail. So if I want to like draw out a little bit more of the mountain, get a little more definition with the volume, I'll come back in here in the mountain and do the same thing. This is kind of called graded washes, where you're laying color down. And then I'm going to use paint. I'm going to use a lot of Payne's gray to add shadow. See, now I can kind of draw, and this is the tricky thing for drawing kind of vegetation in the distance. You want to make sure you leave a lot of white space and make sure it's from light to dark. So the Payne's gray is just a really, it's not really gray. It sort of has a nice green color to it. So I'm putting that in, and that's giving a nice definition to the mountains. And the same thing here. I want this to look like it's a little bit further behind, that ray of light is coming a little bit there. And I'm going to go back here, and for the vegetation, because I want it's dark at the bottom. See, I'm using the brush to kind of draw the vegetation of the cypress tree, and then a little bit there in front of that. So this tree looks like it's coming behind it. And I'm going to take that color and kind of use it to kind of follow the branching structure of that cypress tree. So you see, like, that really begins to have volume a little bit there. And then this tree is a little bit behind that. I'll clean that. And I'll put some Payne's gray there, kind of modeling the surface to make it look like it's got leaves. Same thing here. So these trees are really, wow, it's really starting to have some nice volume to it. And especially the trees behind these, I'm drawing, like I'm using more and more pigment, less and less water to kind of get that kind of feel that those trees are behind one another. So I got that, and same thing over here, a little bit there. And then the foreground, more pigment to kind of get that feel that those trees, I'll clean the brush. Move it around so you can begin to see the trees are really getting a nice sense of volume to them. And they really look like they're in front of the other trees. And the same thing there. One last thing, a little bit here. And now I'm going to add in some purple shadows, because this will really help the building stand out. So I'll put a little purple there, a little purple on this side. That begins to show the volume. And then I'll kind of use a little purple on the undersides to begin to give some depth to the drawing. And one last touch down here. And there you have it. So that's one of the things I like about watercolor, is how quick it is. And now it's kind of neat. Why I like the tape for these sides is now you can pull it off and you can kind of get the reveal. It's kind of like unwrapping a package, if I did it correctly. And boom, there you have it. Any questions about that before we go on to the next series?